Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, last week I got to go on a bit of an adventure thanks to the folks over at Grinding Gear Games. They flew a bunch of people out, including myself, to get not only an updated look at the game itself, hours of actual hands-on time with it, and importantly, the first look at not only the console version of the game, which we had running on the PlayStation 5, but also the new couch co-op feature to go along with that, where two people can actually fully play through the game simultaneously, together. On top of that, the proper reveal of the Witch brought up into PoE 2 now, which we are now allowed to talk about with you all, and I also got a bunch of hands-on time with not only the Witch itself, but also the Monk, a brand new class for the game, to actually see how it felt. First things first, let's talk about the overall feel of console gameplay for those who are interested in that, and honestly, it felt genuinely really good. I got to try out the game with mouse and keyboard a number of months ago, and as someone who has never used a controller for an ARPG really before, it felt extremely intuitive, and honestly, it even felt smoother and more responsive than playing on PC did to me, especially due to the way that movement works in the game. For those unaware, a relatively recent change to the game was the ability to move while casting skills. And the way that the controller bindings are set up, there was auto-targeting for abilities, but you could independently use the right stick to aim your skills regardless of the movement input of the left stick. And overall, with a skill set toggle keybind, you could set up to 24 different keybinds at a time on your controller to fit your needs. And honestly, I was just quite impressed by that aspect of it. Then we have the co-op part. I didn't partake in this much myself, but there were people playing it all around me, and while it seems like there is a touch of awkwardness from the fact that the camera does have to fit both players on the screen at the same time, things like your character not being at the center of the screen unless both of you are stacked on top of each other, or just adjusting to your UI being on the right side of the screen if you're the second player instead of on the left side like default. As well, while on the current build of the game, the co-op was through a shared account, so you had shared gold numbers, things like that. We were told the end goal for release is that you can have two completely separate accounts signed in and playing together on the same system, which was actually pretty cool if it does manage to function that way. With that then, let's move on to the two classes that I got proper hands-on gameplay with myself at the event, and my time was split around 2 hours on Witch, 3 and a bit hours on Monk. So let's talk first with Witch. This feels really good right now in Path of Exile 2. The synergy for the class is extremely intuitive from the get-go between the different skills, and you can even build around minions without even building into them purposely by just equipping scepters, a weapon type that gives you minion skill ranks for free, and also gives you Spirit, which is the resource that defines how many minions you can have. And cool feature for Path of Exile 2 is you actually get to decide your split of which minions you want manually up to the cap of your maximum Spirit stat. Worth mentioning as well that these scepters could be used as a main hand weapon with a shield in your offhand, or they could be used as an offhand with a wand in your main hand, but you can't dual wield scepters to get the double minion skill ranks or anything like that, even though you might think that you would be able to, and it would be pretty cool if you could. The main synergies that I played around in my own time on the Witch were using the Contagion skill, which places a chaos damage over time effect on a singular enemy for a short duration, but if they die while it's active, it spreads and restarts the timer on the effect to any enemy nearby. As I was leveling and getting some support gems, I both increased the duration of the ticking effect of this debuff and the size of the actual spreading explosion that happens on death. Combined that with the Unearth skill, which when hitting corpses or killing enemies with it, creates temporary bone construct scorpion minions, which are really cool, but they are relatively strong, but have a downside of only lasting 12 seconds before they die. That is supposed to be a negative, but these minions can actually be infected by contagion from enemies dying nearby them, which then lets me walk between packs of mobs, and then when my scorpion dies naturally from its timer in the middle of a new pack of enemies, it will spread the already stacked contagion immediately. And it just created this really smooth sort of gameplay loop while running through the areas where it felt like I was in one constant state of combat, and I was at my height of power when I didn't stop to take any breaks, and honestly just felt really comfortable. The weak point of that build that I was messing around with was boss damage, of course, as it was heavily reliant on spreading this specific debuff around, but I did invest some of the goodness into minions, and the duration increase itself on Contagion from the support gem did make it do decent single target damage regardless in my setup. Not to mention, if a boss had any adds, any extra enemies around that they would spawn, they would end up just nuking themselves because of the extra spreading multiplying damage over time effect if I got Contagion onto the smaller enemies before they died. At that point was when I decided to switch to Monk and commit to that for the rest of my progress time, and honestly the main reason for that was after trying both of them out for a little bit, which felt easier, it felt simpler, it felt more clear how to be successful with it, more straightforward. So I wanted to give Monk more of a chance to sort of shine through the early troubles that I had with it, and with that, let's talk about the Monk. I generally do really enjoy the Monk. I had a great time while playing it, but it was undeniably far more difficult to play play than the Witch. The first thing that I noticed, and this was the thing with Warrior 2 when I tried that before, is that while ranged classes like the Witch can move while casting skills, melee can't really do that. Melee skills just sort of have their own movement and momentum tied to them in their animations, and this means that you get animation locked when you attack, as opposed to the range skills that you can just be full free movement while casting, though of course you are slower while doing so. And this was a piece of feedback that I did give to GGG myself as well, which is just that being melee to begin with is of course dangerous in a game like this, and it requires more risk to the player than being ranged. So the fact that ranged players also have the advantage of being able to actively walk around and dodge attacks while still outputting their full damage, and melee have to stop and basically have like an MMO cast time on each attack, even if it is relatively quick, it just feels like a very weirdly sort of balanced direction and a strangely unnecessary distinction between ranged and melee, and the two kinds of classes that those are. To put it simply, for the people who think that that was too many words, it is just harder to dodge attacks as a melee class for more reasons than I would normally think to expect in this, and it limits your offense as a result too. Now that said, I worked around this problem through my build, even if it did take a bit to get working properly. One of the cool parts of Path of Exile 2 is that even bosses are affected by crowd control, by effects like stun. They have higher thresholds for them than normal enemies have, of course, but if you are built to apply enough status buildup, then you can lock even a boss in place with the right setup. So that was my goal. The first piece of this was the beautiful bell skill, which you place and then you hit it with attacks, and it will resonate that attack out in a burst of AoE around the bell, including any elements used on the attack, turning essentially anything that is more single target into AoE. And also, if you hit the bell with something that has freeze buildup, for example, the AoE pop will match that freeze buildup and multiply it. The fun part of this is that there are ways to position yourself and the bell when you put it down so that your attack hits both the enemy in front of you and the bell behind them, which makes it essentially double your single target damage and frost buildup as well. The bell itself is a combo skill, which means that you have to hit 4 strikes before you can use it. Strikes specifically refer to your basic attack with the quarterstaff, or any skill that has the word strike in its name, which is where the next part of this comes into play because our main attack skill is Frosty Strikes, a 3-hit combo that applies lots of chill and freeze buildup, and I leaned into it through my skill points and such to the point where I started to just freeze every enemy in a couple of hits, instantly solving my biggest problem, which was dealing with group combat. With this amount of control, no little enemy could actually really touch me once I got my combo running, and even bosses were getting freeze chained fairly consistently to the point where I started to feel even stronger than my Witch was. But the difference was I had to work for it a fair bit more, and honestly, it was extremely satisfying. With all that said then, let's just talk about how the game feels in general, as it's been a few months since the last time I was able to play. It is incredibly slow and deliberate compared to Path of Exile 1, to the point that I want to really emphasize that you shouldn't expect this to feel the same as the first game on a moment-to-moment combat level. It is still built off the same systems, the mechanical functions of builds and such are still very familiar, but the combat is full of telegraphed attacks that are dangerous as hell to be hit by, expecting you to physically dodge the majority of anything that enemies do and manage groups with crowd control and kiting, because if you don't, you will die exceedingly quickly. Monk was a great example of the sort of flow of it that I was actually really enjoying, where the difficult part was getting a pack together a large group of enemies while avoiding getting cornered by them, and getting my actual combo built up enough to use the bell and initiate my main combo, at which point I could just unload a barrage of frost into it that would wipe out an entire group in a couple of hits, freezing them all so they wouldn't be in danger to me at all, without them being able to fight back in the slightest, and that was just a glorious feeling when it worked. One big thing that I still really do like the change with as well is having skill gems be its own separate system rather than being tied to your gear itself. It just frees up a lot of mental space, honestly, and makes the concept of if gear is or isn't worth using much more approachable, understandable, and intuitive. That said, I think the game still has some roughness around the edges, some balance that needs to be done here or there, some bosses that are a bit off-curve difficulty-wise, and the whole concept of melee being unable to move while striking is something that I genuinely think should change before release, at least in my own opinion, because again, range classes just feel genuinely good to actually maneuver around on, whereas melee was just much slower, more restrictive, and just more difficult until I could essentially lock down my enemies with crowd control so hard that I didn't have to dodge anymore. That's pretty much it then, everyone. Just a wrap up of the new stuff that was revealed to us at this event, what we were told, and the new things that I was able to get my own hands on with myself and actually play. Hopefully you've enjoyed this then, and of course, let us know your own thoughts on all of this down in the comments below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.